Peace, long life, and hey to all you other fellow Christians out there. I wanted to show you guys something that I've talked about for a long time, but you know what? Today's the only time I've actually got them all in the same place at the very same time. Yeah, I'm having trouble with the stand here and all that. Yeah, I'm getting used to this crap. Anyway, what I wanted to show you was something that I've talked about for decades. This is my favorite spark tester of all time. It's Champion L78V, as in Lincoln-78 Victor. Why? It's a surface gap out of a Mercury 20 horse outboard from the 70s. Yeah, probably 71, 72 in that neighborhood. Old 20 horse. Beautiful motor. I changed the propeller from the original to a what they call a load prop or tractor prop. Thing could pull two teenagers up on skis in a little 13.5-foot boat. Boston whaler, no less. Tri-hull. Thing was animal. With a 3-blade prop, it would top out right around, I think, 28 miles an hour, 25, someplace in there. With a 2-blade prop and the angle on it, it'd run 35. It flew. But they knew the maximum RPM. I tried to increase it to 6,000 for 5,500. All it did was eat fuel. They knew their torque curve. Merc is incredible. What's they have to do with this? Well, you see, I put a gator, or a crocodile bill on there anyway. Drilled a hole just big enough for a sheet metal screw. I now have a spark tester. The gap cost is approximately 70 thousandths. Some of you guys are going to go freaking out. That's insane. You're never... Just stop. Listen carefully when I get done. 70 thousandths, okay? And it can arc anywhere. That's the idea of a surface gap. Okay, you see the porcelain's inset a little bit. Oh, probably neighborhood of 30 thousandths, 20 thousandths, somewhere in there. Number 2 is a common one. Power More was the first one I bought, and then I lost it and ordered a few more. There it is. Spot welded on the side. This is a commercial ignition tester. It's exactly what it says, too. You see that gap? You say, that's insane. That's way out of there. It's 200 thousandths. I just measured it now. 200 thousandths. Stop. Listen carefully. Just listen before you purist knuckleheads out there start screaming. Yes, I'm being verbally abusive, but not inaccurate either. So why does 200 thousandths? Why? Well, this is old. Dang, this is older than some of you out there. What's the last one? This is one I've recommended for years because these are hard to get. You can get it off Amazon, no doubt. Ignition spark tester. I'm going to be ordering probably another one here shortly, but I will be ordering more of these, and I'll tell you why in a minute. You know, I've recommended these D21 spark plugs, which is also 386 in Autolite. Why? That's 180 thousandths across there, give or take a little. Yeah, I took the side electrode right off. 180 thousandths. You see, now that's absurd. Stop. Listen carefully. I want you to hear me out here because I've gone through this as well. Tried to figure out why in the world they'd want you to check at 200 thousandths. And I'd been using this for years because that's all I had. And out the road, it seemed to work very well on the older Briggs & Stratton engines. Older Briggs & Stratton engines, you remember that round phenolic block with the 2 pointers in there and all of that garbage? Well, I never knew how to use one, but the idea was they had a gap, a wide gap. It was 166 thousandths, 0.166. Why? Because that told you if a spark jumped that gap, you had 10 to 12,000 volts. 10 was a minimum for Briggs & Stratton to operate back then. Low compression, I think 6.5 to 1, something like that. 6 to 7 to 1, we'll say. The old L-head engines, valve in the block, flathead, as it's often called. So that was 166. That's 70. Okay? It's a little bit less. So you're talking, it tells you at least you have someplace in the neighborhood of 4 to 5,000. But if you look at the type of spark, how blue it is, how wide it is. Spark is voltage to jump the gap, but the total is watts because there's a certain amount of amperage that can go across there. Now the coil is going to produce what? You say volts. You know that. But then for the spark to occur, it needs both amps and volts. Volts to jump, amps to be the spark. You hear me? Okay. So this tells you got 4 or 5 thousandths. This one tells you 200 thousandths from 166, another 40 thousandths. So now you know you've got in the neighborhood of what, 12 to 15,000. Okay, and this one's similar, 180, just a little more than the 166 that Briggs and Stratton wanted to tell you got 10 to 12,000. So you got about 12,000 volts, close to 15,000 volts. And this one, just to give you an idea, it has spark. But this one, the unique thing is you can hear the spark easier than you can on any of the others. You say, well, that's a big spark. You're going to hear it. Yeah, you will hear some, and you'll hear it, but why this one? This one you'll hear a little more because the watts, it only takes a few volts to jump it, but the coil is producing the watts. So yeah, it's easy to jump, but you've got some amps in there. And this one really gives you a nice blue spark. It's easier to see. These two, however, give you a nice long spark, but it's thin. And sometimes during the day it's hard to see that rascal. Why? Well, because it's the watts coming out of the coil is going to be roughly the same, but now it's manufactured because as it jumped the gap, it's mostly made up of, that wattage number is made up of volts and fewer amps. Same magnetic field of the coil, but now you need volts to jump the gap. Well, then the spark is still going to be blue, but now it's thinner, smaller in diameter, so to speak, or width, whatever you want to call it. So that's one of the reasons I keep this one around. And it's easier, it's smaller, fits into places a little better. But any other spark plug you can get, just for the fun of it, let's play the game and say you need space. Get a regular old chainsaw spark plug here. Hang on. Alright, sooner or later here, I'm going to get my knee fixed so I don't have to limp everywhere I go. Glasses back on. I'm going to turn my old Mac Tools doodad back on. Make sure it's zeroed. It's not zeroed. Clean out your jaws. Close it gently, or firmly I should say. Make sure it stays at 0 without your hand on the thumb wheel. And what do we have here? This is an approximation because it's a projected nose. Okay. You'd have to read it backwards, but it's 131 thousandths. 131 and a half to go from the top of the porcelain to the side. So let's call it 130.135. Someplace in there. Well, what's that? A little bit less than 1 3/8. So what are we talking there? 1 3/8, 6 16, 5 16ths. We'll go with that. That's 5 16ths at 312. So you're a little above that. But still, you got a pretty good gap. And at one point here, I measured and I ended up, 375. So you got not 1 3/8, but you know what I mean. 0.135 or 0.1375, depending on where, because the porcelain isn't perfect. The center electrode isn't perfect. This is a used one. But it gives you an idea that Briggs & Stratton wants 166 thousandths. Well, you've got 135 here. Depending on where you measure it, 135 to 130, 375. So you can get a fair amount of gap. Just pull that side electrode off of there. And because it's projected nose, you'll get a wider gap than if it was not a projected. Well, what's the projected nose? Take a look. You can see the porcelain above the edge, and obviously the point is even higher. Okay? This is not a projected nose plug. It's not a Y gap as Champion used to call it. You don't see the porcelain and you barely see the tip above the edge. Okay, that's a standard gap. And of course, this one's darn near flush. Same idea, standard gap, and then there's your surface gap. This is all flush across there. You put this on a level surface and it'll stand there. So it's not going to be rocking. unless you're on a spot where the entire thing, yeah, I guess it is a projected, put up there slightly above proud, but not much. 5 thousandths, 10 maybe, about 5. So this one's near flush. This one's just above flush. This one's well above, obviously. So there you get an idea of the different types of spark plugs and the gaps that they can jump that you can use as a spark tester to give you an idea. Now this is a used plug. Would I recommend it? No. For the cost of a new plug, $4 or $5, get a new plug. Cut the side electrode off. Don't use a China plug. Excuse me. NGKs are fine. I'm a firm believer in 2 plugs, Autolite and Bosch. Those are my 2 favorite plugs of all time. There's just no way around it. Even for my cars, Autolites. The other thing I found out years ago was that AC spark plugs work best in GM cars. But if we couldn't get that, Autolite worked very well. And the GM lunatic I used to work with was the one that said so. He just said, you put a champion plug in one of my cars, he says, I'll break your arm. What do you do if they're already in there? You throw them away, he yelled. Denny Hamlin, Hamlin Beach area. Rockport, New York. That was his. So if you ever see Denny, tell him I'm alive and I said hi. But Denny by now has got to be, what, 70 something, Denny? We ain't spring chickens no more. I worked with him when I was 23, 24, 64 now. Long time ago, Denny. That's how I know you're 70. Probably almost 80. Anyway, there we are. Now, the other thing to remember, as I say now for the 7,000th time, just to get your attention, which I should break my habit of it, but it's difficult. You'll see me spinning a plug in a rag here. This is something I forget all the time. It doesn't usually make a difference, but just to give you an idea, some of you are going to ask, with all the new spark plugs, why the old ribs on the old spark plugs? The old style, they were all ribbed. Every single one of them. All of them were ribbed. I don't know if I even have one that's... Yeah, I do. No, not quite. I have a reduced version. Not much of a rib, but it is still ribbed. This is a DJ8J. Talk about going back in history. What's another one that I had here? I just had a set of them. There they are. Nope, same thing. Even the NGK has ribs. This is for a Honda GX100, little bitty motor on a jumping jack. Well, some of the newer plugs are smooth-sided, and the boots seal better is why they do that. But what's the point of those ribs? The point of the ribs, old boots used to be pretty poor. Yeah, I'm not going to be finding anything. 216, that's equivalent of an H10. That is one of my favorite spark testing spark plugs. Just for field stuff. It's easy to handle the buggers. What are they? Roughly 125 thousandths. Yeah, we'll go with 125. 1/8 of an inch. Looks a lot bigger than an 1/8, doesn't it? Quarter is 250. So anyway, the ribs are there to make it a longer path for any moisture, spark, carbon, or anything else to travel. And the idea is they're hoping to also be a smaller area for the boot to seal on, if it seals at all. And if anything gets in there, it has to travel further to get there. And the spark has to travel further to get back out. That was the idea. Does it work? Well, if you have good boots, no. With good boots, this is annoying. It really is. With the old boots, yeah, it was pretty helpful. But that's all it's for. There's nothing magic about those ribs otherwise. Why? Well, it's not even for cooling, because it's covered with a boot. Unless you go way back, and it's exposed metal. I have one of those. Troy built tiller with a H35 Tecumseh. Why do I have this plug? Well, because I deemed that it was a good plug, and I was running short on Bosch plugs for the chainsaws. That's why I have that. This one I have for my John Deere. John Deere B takes D21 plugs. I think I'd have to check. I think the Ferguson takes either these plugs or the 216s. I can't remember which. 216s come with a Ford tractor. And I think the Case 511B takes them too, but I'm not sure. Johnny lives on these. Then when I changed from Champions to Autolite, they lasted twice as long. Doesn't get run often, so it's better. The guts of it are better sealed. Autolite's just plain a better plug. Anyway, that gives you an idea. Remember, when you're talking voltage, 166 thousandths for Briggs & Stratton is 10 thousandths. And as you go up, like this one does, up to 200 thousandths, you're over that. So now you know why we have a wide gap, why I test with a wide gap, as well as one of the reasons I test with a small gap. This one can tell you a little more amperage, and this one can tell you voltage of your system. So yeah, I obviously have them all around all the time. And this one tells me whether my magneto on the Johnny B is any good. This one tells me if it's working. This one tells me how good. All right, tutorial, 16 minutes and 30 seconds shortly. You folks have a good day, and hopefully some of you can glean some information out of this that's worth a hoot. See ya.